Welcome home. Samantha Clark's heart nearly jumped as she unlocked the door and stepped into the dark space of her home. Quickly turning on the light, she turned to see the source of the voice, her husband. "Robert, baby, you almost gave me a heart attack." A smile appeared on her face. "I didn't know you were supposed to be back tonight. You surprised me." "And you liked my surprise?" he asked with a smile, heading toward his wife with a glass of wine in each hand. Samantha forgot for a moment about today's turmoil at work. Now she couldn't think of anything but her husband's blue eyes focused on her and successfully caught her gaze. Oh, how she loved having such a loving husband, and she knew she would be the sole recipient of that gaze. "As you say," she replied with a smile, gracefully accepting the wine and kissing him lightly on the lips. But something about Robert was not right. He seemed cold. He was smiling, but it didn't match the expression in his eyes. Turning away from her, he whispered, "You'll like it then," more to himself than to her. Without another word, he moved away and sat down on the couch. He invited her to sit with him. Samantha hesitantly walked over to him and sat down. "Honey, How are you holding up?" he interjected quietly. His gaze was fixed on the table as he took a sip of wine. "I heard John Richards was killed last night. Poor guy." His voice betrayed no emotion, but there was no sympathy in it either. Samantha inwardly wrinkled her nose. She didn't know whether it had to do with the topic of conversation or her husband's tone. She looked away for a moment. "The whole firm is in chaos. Everyone is shaken to the core. No one can figure out what happened. John was shot suddenly and unexpectedly. The police don't have any leads yet, but they say it's a crime of passion." This time Robert looked at her with eyes that seemed foreign to her. "But how are you holding up? Surely you must be in a lot more pain," he asked in an even voice. His eyes watched as countless emotions flashed in her eyes. Fear, horror, surprise, and strangely enough, rage. She turned to look at him. "Darling." "What are you?" Her mouth was suddenly dry. "Oh, I'm sorry. I know it's a touchy subject. Your lover was shot and killed in some run-down motel." He said this in a voice that sounded somewhat apologetic. It surprised even himself, for he knew how aloof he was. "Robert!" His wife, with whom he had lived for 7 years, jumped to her feet. "How could you even hint at that? How could you say I was sneaking around behind your back?" She almost shouted at him. As she stood up, she forgot about the wine glass in her hand. Most of the wine spilled onto her suit and the carpet. Robert Clark chuckled softly. She was devoid of any humor. "Darling?" He looked her straight in the eye, studying the fear hidden beneath the expression of false anger at his accusatory statements. "So you weren't sneaking around behind my back then?" He raised his open palm sharply in a stopping motion. "Here." Taking the folder from its place on the couch, he held it out to her. He felt no joy watching his wife take the folder with shaking hands. He took no joy in watching her complexion fade as she looked at the top photograph, which showed his wife in a highly compromising pose with John Richards, a partner in the law firm where she worked. He had not enjoyed looking at her slumped, hunted face as her hands slumped to her sides, and she dropped both the photograph and the wine glass. He liked the wine, however, and calmly took another sip. Shocked, Samantha sat up gingerly, eyes wide. "Earth to you, to my wife," Rob exclaimed, grinning to himself. He was struck again by how detached he seemed. His wife slowly turned and looked at him. "Honey, it doesn't mean anything." Her voice shook as she tried to reassure her husband. She thought about it being a disposable thing, but pushed the thought away. The pictures had been taken quite a while ago, judging by the fact that they depicted her with long hair. Months ago, when she had long hair. The room was her and John's usual place where they used to hang out when they wanted to have fun, in their usual motel. And then another stray thought struck her. How long had Rob known about their affair? And could he have killed? Don't even think about it, her husband interrupted her musings. I wasn't the one who killed your lover. I wasn't even in town, remember? He asked, as if he had read her mind. Robert tried not to give away his smirk. Now back on topic. Still wondering how I can figure out you're acting secretly behind my back? His voice was cold, hard, and held just a hint of anger. Honey, trust me, it doesn't mean anything, she pleaded. There was a pleading in her eyes, a hope that he would understand. Yeah, I did it for you. For us. She moved closer to him and took his hands in hers. That's why I made partner so quickly. Now we have everything we could ever want. This house, money, the status, everything. With each word, her tone became more and more confident. She was sure Rob would understand her efforts and they could put this behind them. Honey, Robert spat, as if the word brought disgust to his entire being. Wrenching his hands out of her grip, he uttered, When you sell yourself for some stupid partnership, that's something. When you neglect your husband, the man who loved you most, in favor of some womanizer, that's something. It's something when you disregard all your marriage vows and continue to date another man behind your husband's back for more than a couple years, and then come home every night and want to be loved after your lover has slept with you like an animal. By this time, Robert stood up and turned away from his wife. He didn't want Samantha to see the suffering, the pain in his eyes, even if his voice trailed off a little. He inwardly cursed himself for his inability to control his emotions. He had replayed this scenario in his mind many times, but now that he was actually doing it, his acting wasn't all that brilliant. Apparently, in your vocabulary, nothing means a lot more, much more than our marriage. He turned to look at her, and a pair of watery forest eyes glared back at him. The words flew out of his wife's mouth. It was clear to her that there was resentment in her husband's voice, even as he turned away from her. His words hurt her deeply. She just stared at him with tears in her eyes and a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. Robert, I beg you. Stop, Samantha, he said sharply. His eyes were icy pools. I'll listen to you when I've had my say. For now, just hear me out. He held out a handkerchief to her. She nodded frantically, accepted the piece of cloth gratefully, and wiped the tears from her eyes. He lowered himself into his seat, raised his head, and stared up at the ceiling. Until a few months ago, I considered myself the luckiest man in the world, thinking I had the love of my life with me. He smiled weakly, remembering the good old days, but then his expression darkened. But it was all a damned illusion. He growled bitterly, staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. Soon I began to notice a change. My loving wife began to enjoy work more than life at home. He sighed. I didn't suspect anything at first. I just thought about how determined you were and how desperate you were to make partner. He looked at her with the corners of his eyes and smiled bitterly. I just didn't realize how desperate. Samantha shuddered. She really wanted to say something, to tell him she loved only him. But she couldn't. Robert continued. I only found out about it at your firm's Christmas party last year when you were announced as the new partner. And what an event that was. He grinned grudgingly. Imagine catching your wife and her lover whispering passionately in one of the men's room stalls about how they were having and receiving holiday sex and that hubby's not getting any tonight. He slouched in his chair. I almost didn't believe it was you, even when he called you by name. His voice cracked, and he had to stop for a few seconds to contain the rage that burst from his barriers. But I couldn't deny it. Not after all the signs that have been in front of me for a long time. I was just too blind to see them, Robert said nonchalantly. Deep breathing helps a lot, he thought. I guess I trusted the woman I married too much and it ruined me. Samantha shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, and she started to speak, but Rob interrupted her. At least that's what I thought at first. He sighed. After a few therapy sessions, I realized it wasn't my fault. I was just doing what a good husband should do and supporting my wife with the utmost love and faith. It wasn't my fault that our wedding vows meant so little to my dear wife. He finished with a shrug. His wife lowered her gaze, and tears flowed from her eyes onto the carpet. After that night, I decided to take 2 different steps. First, I hired an investigator to gather all the evidence of your infidelity, and with any number of men— What? How was I supposed to know it was only John? He waved away her denying, puzzled look. The second thing is to try to rekindle our passion, to make you fall in love with me again. He lifted his wine glass and took another sip. Too bad, but after my failed attempts to get you to love me again, I realized that our marriage was long over, and any love we had was dead. The video from the private investigator only reinforced that fact. He snorted. His eyes suddenly lit up with fury, and he stared into the void, remembering the horrible words he'd heard from his wife and her lover on those tapes. There you see, darling. A smile appeared on his face that didn't match the pain in his eyes. A man can only listen to so much that his wife and her lover say about her husband, an ignorant cuckold, before he breaks down and loses all hope in their sham marriage, no matter how false or faint that hope was. Honey, please! Shut up, honey, I'm talking. The coldness in his voice stopped her. He turned and looked at her with a mixture of regret, disgust, and fury in his eyes, but his smile remained in place. It was a sad smile. Her own face expressed misery and helplessness. After watching your tapes and hearing your conversations with your lover, I was sure our marriage was long over. I just realized it too late, he began. You rejected all my attempts to repair our marriage, preferring to spend more time with that bastard, John, he spat out. I tried to be a little dominant without being too pushy with you, but that didn't work either. All you ever talked to me about was how much work you have. Yeah, there's a lot to work on, judging by your performances on those tapes. He grinned unhappily. But after watching the 3rd or so tape, I didn't have the fight in me anymore. That was all after you made partner, so you don't have to tell me I did it for us. It was really nice to hear your lover say degrading and disgusting things about me, and you agree with every word he said. His fists clenched into fists and shook in his lap. I'm sorry, I can't go into detail. Even now, I can't fully control my rage at the memory of those things. But it's even better than before. Rob smirked. So I went to therapy again. I was blaming myself again, wallowing in self-pity and such, and it took me a while to get back on my feet. Then I wanted to leave you. But I didn't want to, and I couldn't. Not until I destroyed all feelings of love for you. So I could start a new life where I wouldn't even think about you. He smiled. And what better way than to spend it with you, the so-called love of my life? He grinned. I know it sounds weird, but it really helped. Seeing you ignore your husband every day and every night and keep seeing your lover, I've accepted the fact that we're just 2 strangers living together. And my love for you slowly but steadily faded. I no longer felt the anger, resentment, or betrayal I used to feel. Make no mistake, I still feel them, as only psychopaths can completely and successfully block them out. But by making peace with myself, I've become a different person. He smiled nostalgically. It just took time. 8 months to be exact. At that moment, it hit his wife. Startled by his words, she looked into Robert's eyes and saw in them only a sea of calm replaced by pain. They were the same eyes she had seen for the past few months, and only now was she paying attention to them. Those eyes were calm, but seemed so detached, so distant. Like she wasn't looking into the eyes of her husband of 7 years, but some stranger. They frightened her. Why was she only noticing this now? Then she remembered the sex. She remembered how loving sex with her husband had been until a few months ago. It had been tender, caring, and full of love. Now there was no love or passion in it, hardly any kissing or caressing. She realized now that it seemed her husband was just repeating the motions during sex. With her husband, it still felt like love-making, not rough sex like with her lover, but at the same time, it felt different. Had she been so blinded by her lust for John that she hadn't even noticed how her husband had changed? Tears flowed down her eyes again as she realized that was the case. "I was still smiling and acting normal with you, but it was just an act," he said bluntly. "I didn't stop having sex with you, even though I was afraid of hooking something inside you. But in a way, I minimized it. Lucky for me, you didn't want kids yet. And you always insisted I wear a condom rather than pop the pill for headaches." His gaze stopped on a picture frame on a cabinet against the opposite wall. It was their wedding photo. "But you let that bastard sleep with you every time." His voice was low and sounded detached rather than angry. His wife wanted to just hug him tightly and never let him go, beg for forgiveness, and try to put it all behind them. He continued, "You no longer disgusted me when we had sex, and I no longer felt love for you when I did it. Back then, you were just a harlot keeping me company and warming my bed." His cold words hurt her deeply, and she tried to look at him with obvious distress on her face. But he simply stared ahead, not taking his eyes off the picture frame. "I knew that if I stopped having sex with you because of the disgust and betrayal I felt because of your actions, I would admit defeat and stay with those feelings forever, with no respite. So I knew what I had to do. I still had sex with you, and each time we did, my love for you died a little at a time, until there was nothing left." He allowed himself a small, bittersweet smile. The wedding picture no longer reminded him of the beautiful dreams he had associated with their marriage. It didn't remind him of his wife's infidelity and blatant disregard for their vows. It spoke only of what would not be, of what he had dreamed of with his eyes open, but never could. And that brings me to the next part. Robert turned and looked at her with eyes that reflected sadness and a small smile. They hurt her more than his cold fury and words. "I have to go. I have a plane to catch to Tokyo. But if you have something to say, say it. I can at least give it to you. Please, honey. Please, don't do this to me. To us," his wife sobbed. Her cheeks flushed, and a pleading look appeared in her eyes. "Please forgive me. I only did it for you. For us." She squeezed his hands lightly, knowing that if she let go of him, it would be forever. "I know I've made some mistakes, and I have no intention of repeating them. But please, just find it in your heart to forgive me. I'm not asking you for immediate forgiveness. Forgive as long as you want, but just don't leave me." Robert frowned. He still could not see her pain without experiencing it himself. There was a time when he would have turned heaven and earth upside down before he would have allowed a single tear drop to show in his wife's eyes. But that time was long gone. "Samantha," he began in a calm voice. "Under any other circumstances, I would have told you that it wasn't me who did this to us. It was you. I would tell you that you don't deserve my forgiveness, but I won't do that." He smiled sadly. "I will say, however, that you should ask forgiveness from the late Mr. Richard's wife, who lost her husband because of your actions. After all, his 3 innocent children lost their father, and his unsuspecting wife lost her husband just because some people couldn't keep it in their pants." It was the only thing that left a bad taste in his mouth. The thought that 3 innocent children had lost their father in this way, and he was partly to blame. He really wanted to say, "If you hadn't lost your way, I wouldn't have had to record your and every other wife's extramarital affairs with that serial womanizer. If you hadn't pushed my buttons, I wouldn't have had to forward a copy of every recording to each of the husbands. one of whom may have killed your lover. But he wouldn't do it. He didn't want to miss his plane. It was just a miracle that none of the other wives or their husbands noticed anything. All the other romances, though, were short-lived, 2 or 3 encounters at most. Only his own wife seemed to be a permanent star. Rob had kindly asked the private investigator not to film his wife after the 3rd show. He had plenty of money, but he wasn't a masochist. 3 was more than enough. Rob had been deliberately silent about the fact that he had sent Mrs. John Richards a copy of each tape anonymously. There were 4 in all, and he could guess at the ruinous path his wife's career was taking. He didn't need a hysterical Samantha right now. He had to hurry. If Mrs. Richards had already turned the tapes over to the police, they would be at his door at any moment, along with the others, and he really didn't want to miss his plane. Yes, leaving the country would incriminate him, given how involved he was in the case, but he had more than enough of an alibi to prove he'd been out of town when the murder happened. Samantha was openly sobbing at this point, and the implications of her husband's words about Mrs. Richard were not reaching her consciousness. "As for you doing this for us," began her husband, looking at her pityingly, "I can only ask if you think me so foolish." He sighed. "No, Sam. You didn't do it for us, and you certainly didn't do it for me. It was your own depraved, insane, and disgusting desire. I saw the tapes, and while you didn't encourage it, you didn't stop it from humiliating me every chance you got. Hell, you giggled like a fucking schoolgirl at most of them." He had to restrain himself from raising his voice, but then he decided not to and opened the floodgates. "You were desperate to make partner. You wanted more money. You wanted this big, unnecessary house for the 2 of us. You were desperate to fit into a circle of high and powerful people. I was happy with what I was earning, even if not as much as you. I was happy in our old neighborhood, with our old friends, in our old house. But don't forget, you only became successful because I was so supportive. Not to mention that I turned down a high-paying promotion with a transfer to France just because you wanted to stay here at your fucking law firm and make partner here. I put our fucking sham marriage before my career, just for you." That brief outburst left him panting and furious. Robert immediately cursed himself for losing control of himself. He wanted to avoid this at all costs, but he couldn't. He shrugged his shoulders. Stuff happens. "Anyway, I have a plane to catch." With those words, he stood up, ignoring his crying wife, and headed up the stairs to his bedroom. Their bedroom. When he returned, he had his bag and suitcase in his hands. His wife had stopped crying and was looking at him with pleading, terror-filled eyes. "Robert, please." Her voice had lost none of its power. He sighed. "I've spoken to the lawyer and expect the suit to be served on him tomorrow." He saw the fear in her eyes intensify. "I've canceled our joint account. I won't fight for any of it. You can keep the house, the cars, and everything in them." His gaze paused briefly on their wedding photo. "I don't need the baggage of the past for the new life I'm about to start." "Honey, please, listen to me. We can go to counseling and settle our differences." Her voice took on a commanding tone, but there was desperation in it. "We can put all this behind us and start a new life here, the kind you want. We'll have lots of kids and we'll even move into a house you'll like. Just give me another chance." Robert smiled sadly. Pity and pain splashed in his eyes. "But we can't have any of that, can we? After everything I've been through, I don't want to take any chances." He walked over to the couch where his wife still sat and dropped 2 items on the glass table, his wedding ring and engagement ring. "Living with you, even knowing of your cheating, I've faced many of my own demons. But my faith in you, which you ridiculed, is not one of them." He gathered his things and headed for the door. "Besides," he began, before walking out the door and out of his former life, "there is no psychiatrist who can revive a dead marriage." With those words, he closed the door behind him. Leaving his wife too hurt to cry, She just stared at her husband's wedding band and ring, remembering all the times they had been together and regretting taking such a loving husband for granted.